There is a missing point in this whole Ferrari 12Cilindri Manuale discussion, and it goes beyond the product in itself. A very dangerous brand message from Ferrari, that is, if you want the sensorial experience of a brand new manual Ferrari, the best they can do for you is offer an emulator, like a sim rig. And the consequence is an instinctive repulsion caused by the much-studied Uncanny Valley Effect that we'll explain later. In some sense, the Manuale sounds like a late, half-baked solution to try and dilute the PR crisis caused by the Lucci. And for sure, they force all this noise coming from more than a year or two ago, coming especially from their customer base. And when I say half-baked, it's kind of literal. This is the painful consequence of the 12Cilindri platform never being developed to receive a manual gearbox on its transaxle, cross-member, electro-electronic architecture, nor its floor pan. It has nothing to do with that PR allegation that the engine is too powerful for a manual transmission. Actually kind of saddens me that the press swallowed this outright and delivered it back to the public without questioning or even making a small research. 16 years ago, the 599 GTO had an automated single-clutch Graziano gearbox, a small evolution of the very same manual gearbox found of the GTB cars. The GTO delivered 620 Nm, a shy 8.5 less torque than the 12Cilindri. So obviously, this is not a gearbox limitation, it's a platform limitation caused by a corporate decision that made sense back then and traces back to the F12 14 years ago. That is the missing point that the press should at least be pointing. The reason why we have this manual emulator on the 12Cilindri is not so romantic. The F12 was the car that shut the door permanently to the manual transmission that was offered before on the 599, which used the same box of the automated single-clutch F1 superfast pedal shift version. The F12 introduced a much faster and efficient dual-clutch transmission by Magna powertrain, and with that, a manual would require a specific development that just didn't make sense back in 2012, remember. The F12 is the platform core of the A12, which is the whole backbone of the 12Cilindri architecture. The manual transmission was killed for the F12 because the market was so different back then. In 2014, even Porsche GT boss Andreas Kroninger was advocating for the death of the manual transmission on high-performance cars. He said, "Shut up and drive," about the PDK-only 991 GT3 that killed the manual option back then. Now take a look on what Andreas says about manuals these days and what Porsche is offering on their catalog. The change on the demand for the manuals in the last years was brutal. We've had an exploding demand and valuation for the manual Ferraris like the 550, 575 and 599. We've had a small tsunami of conversion kits for automated Ferraris like the F430 and the 612. More and more manual offers from brands like Porsche on their GT cars. And of course, the boutique manufacturers like Pagani and GMA, on which most of the Utopias and T50s are manual transmission cars. The bitter truth is that Ferrari found too late in the game that they needed a purist production car in their lineup. You want some proof? In July 2025, 1 year ago, Chief Marketing and Commercial Officer Enrico Galliera told Evo magazine that they had no plans of reintroducing manual gearboxes ever. He said, "Whoever wants to have this kind of classic experience, they can buy and restore our fantastic classics." Sounds out of touch because it was out of touch. That brand statement kind of hammers the nail that yes, the 12Cilindri Manuale was a last-minute decision call to dilute the PR noise and stock shockwave made by the Lucci. They didn't plan this manual guy on the car platform life cycle. So I mentioned the Uncanny Valley Effect on the beginning of this video and now it's time to explain it. The greatest risk facing the 12Cilindri Manuale may not be that its simulated manual transmission feels unconvincing. It might be quite the opposite indeed, that it feels almost convincing. By trying too hard, the Uncanny Valley Effect is unavoidable. Bear with me. As most of you have seen, Ferrari's Manuale by wire system has a gated gear lever and a clutch pedal, but neither has a mechanical connection to the transmission. Once in manual mode, the driver's inputs on the H-pattern gate are read as electronic signals sent to the transmission control unit back there in the dual clutch transaxle, the very same 8DCL 900 of the standard 12Cilindri. Everything was carefully engineered to feel, click and sound as real as possible. The lever uses a mechanical device beneath the gate to create the expected notchiness and resistance, including eccentric rollers to make it self-centering, right? And the force curve on the clutch pedal was based on the manual 599. For that, it uses a profile rotating drum coupled with a preloaded system. There is even the possibility of producing a bad start or an artificial stall induced by the ECU and transmission unit based on the signals of your wrongdoings. So that's an extraordinarily sophisticated physical controller for an ordinary dual-clutch transmission, perhaps the most expensive and elaborate sim rig ever created. That is where the Uncanny Valley Effect becomes relevant. The term belongs to the roboticist Masahiro Mori, and it describes our deep discomfort, an instinctive, unsettling response caused on us by a robot or an artificial character that looks and moves almost like a real human, and almost is the trigger. A clearly stylized robot won't disturb us because we accept it for what it is. But as the imitation becomes more realistic, small inconsistencies become not only noticeable, but repulsive. Something that is 98% convincing can feel stranger than something that makes no attempt to appear real at all. The same effect will apply to the Ferrari simulated manual experience. A conventional pedal shifter is an interface defined by electronic expectations by design. You pull a switch, the electronics command the gearbox, the car changes gear. There is no pretense, there is no special effects. The Manuale, however, feeds a very different expectation. It has an exposed metal gate, a clutch pedal, and a polished lever. They promise a direct mechanical relationship between the driver and the transmission, yet that relationship doesn't exist. So the lever doesn't select a gear, it requests one. The clutch pedal doesn't physically control the clutch, it provides an input from which the software will calculate how the dual clutch transmission should behave if it ever was a single clutch manual. A real manual transmission communicates very complex feedback, and that's why enthusiasts talk about the man-machine connection it brings. Through the gear lever and its knob, the driver feels vibrations generated by the engine, the gearbox shafts, bearings, gear sets, and the texture of a shift changes with transaxle oil temperature, engine speed, driveline load, and synchro effort in that very specific moment. Powertrain itself moves under the acceleration and deceleration, and that subtly alters the position and loading on the lever. That's why a hurried shift on the red line in a corner feels so different than a loaded one in mid-range on a straight. Both are wide open throttle shifts but are so different to operate, right? That is because the feedback is multi-directional, it's mechanical imperfection at play. And here lies the main threat to this game. The more convincing the simulation tries, the more noticeable any missing trace of information may feel. The absence of specific vibrations and resonance that you would feel through your right hand and left foot. A resistance that remains too consistent when you shift, feeling the same when you're neutral or in wide open throttle. An imperceptible delay happening between the hand movement and the powertrain response, or a clutch pedal that lacks the regularities and imprecisions of a real pressure plate. Just a little of this is enough to break the illusion. Welcome to the Uncanny Valley Effect. We've seen it on movies like The Polar Express and the disturbing Mars Need Moms from 2011. They tried too hard to be realistic, but the gap that exists in almost triggers a repulsive reaction from our brains. So Ferrari may have created a remarkable interface, but the closer it tries and gets to reproducing a genuine manual transmission, asking the driver to forget the truth behind it, the consequence may be the very opposite of the man-machine connection. And that connection is the very reason why the manual transmission is on such hype. So, what do you think about all that? Do you really prefer an emulated manual gearbox for the sake of convenience? Or would you stick with a real manual transmission if the goal is having a complete sensorial connection? Please make your comment. If you did enjoy this video, please subscribe to Baraton Cars. See you next time.